I want to welcome everybody to Pittsburgh. This is my hometown. My parents were born and raised here. My grandparents lived here. It's a great city, so welcome. And get out of the city if you get the opportunity, because it's much nicer outside the city. But I just want to kind of level set. I only have 30 minutes, including questions. A lot of these rules, laws, regulations are very complicated, very detailed. I'm really going to give you this is what it is, and this is how this is kind of where it is in the rulemaking process. I'm not going to go into any super details on what each regulation is. So if you want to catch me later, I'm happy to answer any questions. Lot of research compliance regulations have changed very recently and are in the process of changing. Those are the ones I'm going to kind of talk about: the Department of Defense and their CMMC program, the NIH control access data. NIST 800-171 has just changed. It's kind of finalized now. And SPM 33 is just changed again. The FAR CUI rule. So if you were here for Anurag Shankar's workshop yesterday, he talked about the FAR basic safeguarding clause. Well, the FAR is going to have a CUI rule as well. And NSF made a statement on peer review and CUI. They've since withdrawn it, but they did make a statement, so it's coming at some point. And kind of related, because some of you might work in enterprise IT situations, the Department of Education has released a CUI rule, or is going to release a CUI rule. There are other research compliance regimes that really haven't changed recently, and I say recently within the last year. That's HIPAA and GDPR. So those are kind of static. They really haven't changed much. The first one I want to talk about, there's two DoD CMMC rules. The first one covers 32 CFR 170. That is the actual CMMC program. That is how assessors are certified, how C3PAOs are certified, how they're going to use certifications, what the levels mean. That's what the 32 CFR. There's a bunch of stuff in there that we don't know. The final rule is not come out yet. It's going to come out any day now. We suspect that it's going to be November because of previous Federal Register agendas, but it's past regulatory review. So we're really just waiting to see what they changed. This particular draft dictates that 800-171 revision 2 is going to get used, which is not the current revision. It also says it really increases the scope of CMMC and CUI because they brought in something they called security protection data, which they didn't define. So we're all kind of waiting so what exactly does that mean? They gave some examples: log data, configuration data. But what else are they talking about with security protection data? I participated in the EDUCAUSE comments on this, and that's one of the things we asked, is like, hey, can you tell us what this is? Because this is a big deal from a scoping perspective. Past regulatory review in the 13th of September. So any day now. The next thing is we will see it published in the Federal Register, and it will take effect 60 days from the day it is published in the Federal Register. So again, it could be any day now, could be November, could be January for all we know. We're really looking forward to this because the true CMMC cycle process, getting people actually certified, can't start until this rule is out. So a lot of people waiting for that. There are 48 CFR updates. This is DoD contracting language. This is still out for public comment. So you've got 5 more days, 6 more days to make comments if you have issues with this. There really isn't much change from the final interim rule that they issued like 3 years ago. This is the contracting language that the DoD is going to use to bring the CMMC program into your contracts. It actually gives some guidance to contracting officers on when and how to use it. I don't know how much they're going to listen, but there's some guidance in there. It's out for comment. October 15th is the last date for comments. Next steps, the DoD is going to look at all those comments, and they have to adjudicate them, which basically means they have to address them somehow. Now, they will tend to address them in groups. Like, oh, there were about 30 comments that said, you suck. That's out of scope. We're not going to address that, right? So they do it in comments. They're not going to go line by line. And again, that's going to start on October 15th. So when the comment period is over. Again, you still have comments about it, get them in. It can be like 2 sentences. They do make the comments public, so you can go and see whatever comments were already made on it. Very recently, July, NIH updated their genomic data security policy and basically said, you're going to follow 800-171 for any new and renewing contracts starting on January 25th. So if you've got dbGaP data, this will apply to you. If you access dbGaP data, this will apply to you. It requires NIST 800-171. They link to version 2, but version 3 was already published when they issued this notice. And they've linked to version 3 in some of their news articles. So we actually have no clue what revision of 800-171 they're going to ask for. So kind of keep that in your mind. It's been announced, and it's going to take effect for new and renewing contracts. So start talking to your folks if you've got dbGaP data. Are they ready for this? Because typically, up until now, CUI has been DoD only. Now it's getting into everything else. Just want to say a little quick thing about 800-171. Revision 2 is still kind of in force because the DoD says it is. They issued a class deviation to the DFAR 7012 clause that says you're going to use revision 2. The CMMC rule, the 32 CFR 170, specifically calls out revision 2. So for all intents and purposes, if you are doing DoD work, you want to be concerned about revision 2. For revision 3, this is going to be, if your language says whatever version of 800-171 is in force at the time you signed your contract, that's going to be revision 3. The good thing is there are no direct conflicts between the two, right? There's some things that are easier in R3, some things that are harder in R3. What I've been telling folks that I talk to is, if you're doing DoD, go for revision 2. Focus on revision 2. But take a look at R3, because eventually the DoD is going to go to R3 and see, well, okay, this is what we need to do. So for example, allow listing and deny listing of software that you're running. R2 allows you to do either. You can allow list software or you can deny list software. R3 says you're going to allow list software. So things like that you wanted, if you haven't already implemented it, look to R3 for some guidance on how you might implement that. NSPM 33, the OSTP guidance has been issued, final guidance. It's less concrete than the original guidance. The original guidance was actually the FAR basic safeguarding clause minus the physical security pieces, which is kind of strange because that's actually something that most universities can handle. We can lock a door. But it is currently waiting for NIST to publish a document. NIST created this document, IR, so it's internal review, internal notes, basically, that says, here's the next things that NIST can do. It doesn't say, here's what you need to do. It says, here's the next steps that NIST can do to help us. And so what we're waiting for the final of that publication. NIST released it, no real comment period, but it's not final yet. So we are waiting for that final publication, and it takes effect 1 year after NIST publishes that document. It's been over a year since they published the initial draft, so who knows when the final is going to get published. A new one for some folks, because this is just in its infancy. It was actually announced back in 2016, if you actually read the Federal Register, which, unless you're weird, you probably didn't. It is for all federal acquisition contracts. So NIH, NSF, DoD, NASA, DOE, all of those kinds of contracts are going to fall under this FAR CUI rule. We don't know what it says yet. All we know is that they're going to create a rulemaking about this. Because it is sponsored by the DoD, GSA, and NASA, we kind of think that it's going to be very like CMMC. But we don't know. So that is something coming that's going to affect all federal contracts. Now, are they going to limit it to just CUI data? Are they going to limit it to FCI data? We don't know that yet. We just know that it's CUI rulemaking for federal contracts. They expect to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking in October of 2024. That's the date in the federal agenda, which they're okay at keeping to their estimated dates. But I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see this till November or December. But the first thing that will happen is they will issue it for comments. If you have concerns about how they are addressing CUI, this is going to affect us in a big way, please, please, please make comments. You can make comments as an institution. I work with the EDUCAUSE comments to make comments on these things. Any other groups that you're a part of, you can make comments individually or as a group. So please, please, please make comments if you have issues with them. And some people might not have issues with them. NSF released a peer review letter saying, you're going to treat all of these proposals that you're reviewing as if they're CUI. They had no mention of 800-171, no link to 171. And the little text actually commented more on the confidentiality of this information. But they did specifically say, treat it like it's CUI. And those of us who have worked in the DoD space are like, oh God, how are we going to do that? They withdrew it about a couple hours later. So, but they are thinking about it. So that's something to keep in mind, that you're probably going to see something a little more thought out in the near future. So we have no idea what they're going to do with that, but something. FAR will definitely catch that. Semi-related, the Department of Education is issuing a CUI rule. This is specifically for student records, FERPA, and federal tax information, financial aid information. They have said, we're going to issue a proposed rulemaking October of 2024. Again, they've been talking about this since 2014. They've said they've issued letters. They issued a letter in 2016 that says, hey, you might want to consider using this 800-171 to protect our student records. But they didn't come out and say, yeah, you're going to have to. This rule, we think, is going to come out and say, you have to. So this is, it's not necessarily in the research, but it could be, because some research is student records. You're either doing research on students or you've got your students' grades in your system. So it's kind of tangential, but it does still apply. And again, it is still 800-171, which is different. In the slides that you're able to download, I created a cheat sheet for you. Each one of those links to where that information is, either the Federal Register or the announcement itself. The NSF letter, Koger actually got a copy of it, put it on their webpage, so you can see the original and the withdrawn version. So you can kind of see how things are going. There's a bunch of us that are F5ing the DoD CMMC Rule 32 to see when it comes out. I was actually surprised it didn't come out before I gave this talk. That's why my slides say, as of September 30th, this is accurate, because we are just waiting for that to come out. That's all I have from the official slide standpoint. This is kind of how things stand now. It is a constantly evolving space, but the writing is on the wall. We're going to have to deal with CUI. And we just have to get used to that. Unfortunately, the rules and regulations are not written for universities. They don't take into account the open culture that we have. They don't take into account the open networks that we have. They don't take into account high-performance computing systems. They say, thou shalt use antivirus. Okay, and you want me to do that on a system that doesn't have antivirus because I wrote the system? So there's a lot of things that they didn't take into account. So I really strongly recommend that when you have the opportunity to give comments on these rules and regulations, that you do so. Because it's going to matter to you. You should have some input into how it's going to matter to you. So I think I talk too fast. So I'm totally willing to answer questions. If you have it, like I said, I can answer details about all these rules and regulations. I am actually a certified CMMC assessor. So I am actually able to work with a C3PO to assess for CMMC when that actually happens. So if somebody says they're CMMC certified, they're not. You can't be CMMC certified as an organization yet. So, got a question?
Thank you for that. I actually have a question about, you said all these rules are changing or in process of changing. Is the AI included in this one? Are they working on this one? Because you didn't talk about the details. I'm asking about the AI, the artificial intelligence.
So there is some AI regulations that are talking, mostly in Europe, actually, about how AI is being used for decision-making. And that tends to fall under the GDPR is how they've like angled that. But there are some starting to come for AI, but nothing yet.
Any other questions? David.
Yeah, thank you for that really nice summary. I'm just curious, aside from your frustration in waiting for certain things, what do you find to be sort of the most challenging aspect of all of this?
The most challenging aspect, I think, is the scoping. Where does this apply? Where does this not apply? If you look at the differences between 800.171 and CMMC, they are very different in scoping when you look into the details. CMMC has this concept of you're going to pass or you're going to fail. End of story. There is no like, yeah, I'm going to fix that in 10 years, right? 800.171 allows for enduring exceptions. Like we're just not going to do this, and here's why. CMMC doesn't allow that. And so one of the biggest challenges is, okay, I've got this HPC system. How am I going to treat it? Am I going to treat it in the CMMC world as a specialized asset? This is an asset that is not a true computer system, exactly, but it kind of is. But it can't do all these other things because of limitations. Or am I going to treat it as, I'm going to do the best I can, I'm going to put what I can in place, and how am I going to, how are assessors going to look at that? And that's one of the reasons I went and got my assessor certificate, was I want to know how assessors are going to be looking at these things. So if somebody comes to me and says, well, I did this with my system, what would an assessor say? And so far, most of the assessors I've spoken with are reasonable people. If you can argue and have a good risk-based argument for why you didn't do something, and you did this other thing instead, and you can show that it's just as good or better, most of them will accept that. But, like I said, CMMC is pass-fail. Right now, what is going on are the joint surveillance assessments. They are joint between the DoD and C3PAOs. And it's actually the C3PAO doing the assessment, and the DIBCAC's kind of watching over their shoulder. The DIBCAC has the authority to accept the risk for the DoD. A C3PAO doesn't. And that's why they've gone this pass-fail environment. Because a C3PAO can't say, oh, well, the DoD would be fine with this. because they don't know what the DoD feels about it. So they are going to have to put some kind of exception process in place, I think. Yep.
Just following up on that, with the assessment certification that you've got, are you, in the process of doing that, are you getting a lot of guidance or training or tools in terms of the assessment methodology and how much room assessors have to use good judgment?
So there's training on what the controls are. Here's what it's asking. Here's example evidence. Here's things that we would expect to see. What there are is a lot of unanswered questions. And there is a C3PAO forum that a bunch of C3PAOs have gotten together and say, if we run into this situation, this is how we're going to treat it. So for example, virtual desktop interfaces. A lot of people are using this to protect their enclave. So you can still have students and faculty bringing their own devices. Technically, even in a VDI situation, that local laptop is a CUI asset. It is processing CUI because it's displaying it. Historically, the DIBCAC has said, okay, as long as data can't, you can't do screenshots, you can't download data, you can't upload data, we'll accept the VDI. And most assessors are also going that route. We call them contractor risk managed assets. You have to know about them, you have to document them, and you have to document what you've done about it. Like, oh yeah, here's the VDI configuration we did so that the data can't travel. So there's a bunch of those, they call them position papers. So a lot of it is still very much, community driven among the C3PAOs.
So you kind of opened the door to this a little bit. Another question on my mind. A lot of what you presented is very CMMC focused. Do any of the regulations allow potential alternatives to CMMC, or is it just alternatives to complying with some of the underlying controls?
It's really the alternatives to complying with the underlying controls. Everything is fundamentally based on 800-171 as published by NIST. And the actual title is Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information in Non-Federal Systems. They basically took the 853 moderate baseline, which is what federal systems have to meet for this type of data, and they went through and they said, well, we don't want this one because it doesn't have anything to do with confidentiality. We're taking this one out because we think it's covered by other controls. The original version of R2, it was actually hilarious to read because they have in the appendix how they came up with the controls for 171. There's a bunch of things that they put in as, well, we would expect any organization to be doing this without being told to be doing this. That's all the documentation. And so they backed off on that with revision 3 and said, yeah, well, we found out people really aren't doing this. So if you hear people talking about the NFO controls, non-federal organization, that's what they are.
So we still have some time for additional questions if anyone has any. Scott.
Yeah, thank you for the great summary. I'm wondering if you have any insights to the NIH DB gap requirement.
So the NIH DB gap requirement basically says you're going to follow 800-171.
Right. But if you're, like say, you're operating in an HPC environment, and that HPC environment is not 800-171 compliant, and it will not be by the 1st of 2025.
The good thing with 800-171, and if you read the whole thing, not just the list of controls, if you are working with this, read the whole thing of 800-171, because there's a lot of information in there that doesn't get published because people, oh, these are all the controls you have to do, right? It allows for enduring exceptions. So it allows for not having antivirus on your HPC. You just have to document it, document why, and document a time we're going to look at it again. Next year, we're going to reevaluate and see if there is an antivirus available that makes sense for us. So there are a lot of options. It also allows for a plan of actions and milestones, a POAM. So you can say you're 800-171 compliant and not meet most of the controls as long as you got a plan to meet most of them.
Okay. That
So
helps.
now how they're going to enforce that, I don't know. So
Oh, thank you. That helps a little bit.
it's easier. 800-171 is much easier than CMMC.
Anyone else? We still have a few more minutes.
I'll just add a comment about dbGaP. We use VeraCrypt, by the way, to help out with the HPC control there. Something that gets overlooked with dbGaP is that comes with a certificate of confidentiality. And how many of you are ensuring that your discovery protocols ensure that data don't get accidentally swept up in a discovery that are covered by a COC? Because that's a big violation.
Yeah. And that applies to IRB data too, if you're dealing with any human subjects.
Not necessarily.
So,
Not necessarily. Not all human subjects are covered by COCs.
okay.
Most are not.
Yeah, most are not.
Anyone else?
Feel free to catch me in the hall. I can talk your ear off about this stuff. I've been dealing with it for probably 8 years now, since DFAR 7012 first started appearing in contracts. So
Well, we thank you very much, Laura. Thanks for being here today.